Okay, we are live. This is the Annex Sociology Podcast. I'm Joseph Cohen from Queens College in the City University of New York. I'm joined with my colleague Daniel Laurison from Abilene Christian University. Dan, good to see you.
Good to see you, Joe. Always happy to be here.
And today we got a return guest and a terrific guest, Daniel Laurison from Swarthmore University, to discuss his research on the inner world and social consequences of political professionals. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's fun to be back.
So, but first of all, Daniel, are you going to be at ESS this year? Are you going to be there?
Yeah, I have a author meets critics session for the book actually, and something on my current research, and I really like ESS, so I will definitely be there.
I love ESS. So Daniel's book we're going to talk today, it's called Producing Politics Inside the Exclusive Campaign World, where the privileged few shape politics for all of us. I'm really stoked to talk about it today. It got tons of play. You might have seen it in the media. Daniel, you got a big breakout in the fall when people were talking about elitism, like in the Democratic Party and its face. You know what? Let's hold off on that. I want to get into that for a second, but before we begin, I first of all welcome Daniel. Let me get the screen up properly here, just to make sure that we're. And all right, sorry guys, I'm just trying to work out the. Whoops, there we go. Trying to work out the technical side here. It's a bit rough. We've been having an argument, and I want to a disagreement among ourselves, me and some colleagues, and I wanted to catch your opinion on it. Here's the situation, and tell me if this is something you're experiencing in your department. A lot of people are wrestling with questions about the role of online in their department's future. Like, there's a lot of students who want to learn online. There's a lot of faculty who want to teach online. And our department and a lot of departments are faced with sort of these twin demands and are asking themselves, okay, what's the role of online teaching in our department's future? My personal opinion is online is a patently inferior method of teaching people. It is, I don't think it can be done well. And it's my desire, like in the departments that I participate in, to just limit it. But I wanted to get your takes. Are you facing this pressure for to teach online? Do you teach online? How do you feel about it? Dan Laurison, do you want to start us off?
We don't know which one of our names.
Oh no, Daniel. Let's start with Daniel Laurison. Oh, it's Daniel Laurison and Daniel Morrison. Oh no, this.
You can call me Dan if you want.
Dan and Daniel. Okay, yeah, let's do it like that. Daniel, let's start off as our guest. Are you teaching online? How are you feeling about online?
I hated it the semester that I did it. Well, I should say it was better than I thought it would be. I felt like there were some real conversations that happened. It worked better than I thought it would. So I was dreading it. I didn't like it. It didn't feel good in my body. Also, to just be like sitting at the computer for that long, that intensely. But I sort of came away from that experience not wanting to do it again, but thinking like that was a lot better than nothing. It was a lot better than it could be. Yeah. Our department is not. Our college has been pretty clear that we are an in-person, small liberal arts community. And if anything, some of the pushback has been from faculty who didn't feel safe coming back to the classroom and didn't feel like the college was having enough sort of, pandemic safety features in place for as long as they ought to. So there hasn't been so much debate, but I've definitely noticed, I haven't been teaching the last year, but I've been running my research lab. And last semester, especially, I had a Zoom component mostly for community-based researchers who were off campus and weren't going to make a 45-minute commute just to come sit with us for an hour. A lot of students would come to that, and it seemed like more than was reasonable given how likely it was that anyone was sick in any given day, on any given day. And I sort of cracked down is probably too strong, but I was like, you should be here in person unless you physically are unable to be here in person. Because I just don't, the hybrid, I think, is the worst of all possible worlds. Like, you can't the people who are on Zoom can't really fully participate. They kind of distract everybody else. And in managing the discussion across the two media is just really challenging. So I really don't like that. So that's sort of where I am. I think it's a fine substitute occasionally, but it's not as good as being real in person.
But Swarthmore is like, definitely you're coming back. We're an in-person college. And it sounds like you agree with that.
I mean, I don't think, I think, what do I think? I have a lot of sympathy for the people who were concerned around the pandemic measures, but I think that broadly in-person works better. And, we are able, we're a really rich, really small school. So like nobody can't get to class because of childcare issues or accessibility issues or et cetera. Like we definitely have, first gen and working class students who might need to manage things at home sometimes, but mostly people are really well supported. And so I think it makes sense for the kind of campus that we are.
Dan Morrison, how about you? What's going on at Abilene Christian University and with you specifically with online?
Well, I would say ACU is similar to Swarthmore in some respects, perhaps definitely not as wealthy, but certainly small liberal arts college committed to the in-person experience for the undergraduates who are on the Abilene campus. The thing that just differentiates ACU from Swarthmore and maybe makes it similar to some other schools is that we have essentially a branch campus operated out of Dallas, and those programs are almost completely online. Almost all of the programs are pretty much completely online. There's an office building if people need to come in and have an exam proctor or something like that, but it's a small kind of central administration up in Richardson, Texas. And so those programs have primarily been at the master's level and the EDD level, but increasingly ACU has decided to move into the undergraduate online market, so to speak. And so I think, the concern that some people have raised is just that, is this a two-tiered kind of educational experience where, you have the more maybe privileged, maybe the higher status, higher class, more likely to be second generation or continuing generation students, whiter students, more affluent students, right, who have the time and space and resources and supports to come to Abilene, which is a relatively small, city in West Texas, versus those who have a variety of challenges and are from have a variety of disadvantages, right? And so maybe they opt for an ACU online degree because there's some status with a private liberal arts university. But also those classes are not the same in terms of format or structure. And, you can ask questions about how uniform the quality is across those modalities. I'm not here to make a claim about the quality of those educational experiences. I did teach a class for ACU online. It was mostly master's students in healthcare administration. I personally found it more difficult to kind of keep up with in the flow of my current work, teaching in-person classes and teaching an online class that was mostly entirely asynchronous. That was a challenge, and I've opted not to do it again. So that's where I'm at.
That's it. I guess that so. I'm getting the sense that whether or not online is good for you is really partly a function of who you serve and what like your organization is doing. Because our organization, our mandate is to create like a quality $8,000 a year degree program for like the working class of Queens and Nassau County. And so for us, there's a discussion, well, online will expand franchise and it will allow more people to get degrees. And there's that angle. But my impression from COVID is that online is patently worse. And my concern is that if we lean in on online, then the working class won't have the access to that campus experience that your students get at private schools. What's interesting, and correct me if you have a different impression. What the big difference was? I learned this in COVID in our graduate program. During COVID, I realized that only a fraction of what students learn in college is professor to student communicated knowledge in a class setting. Like when they were online, they weren't doing projects, they weren't meeting each other, they weren't like collaborating with stuff, no extracurriculars. And like it turns out that's a super important part of like the formative experience. And you could see it when the students went to the job market, you know.
Well, I think that's right, Joe. I often think about our campus as being like a tiny city.
Yeah.
You know, people sleep on campus, they eat on campus, they do recreation on campus, they do all the things that, you know, non-student citizens in Abilene and Taylor County do, but they just do it in much more intensive social networked relations, right? And those relationships are ways that we ask students to practice what it means to be a citizen, right? So there's actually like I mean, not to get all Dewey on us, but there's like a democratic function of college, a residential college experience that seems significant, not only just for, you know, job skills and networking and how to talk with people and work across differences and things like that, but also like, what does it mean to be a member of a community? And what are the trade-offs that you have to live with or accommodate in order to, you know, be with others?
Daniel?
I think that's part of what you're missing. But even just for sort of the, you know, even if just what you're paying attention to, because if you're a commuter college, your students aren't getting a lot of that regardless. But even just for the in-classroom piece, like a lot of my students, the first class I taught when we came back in person, basically said they didn't remember anything from their classes from the previous year that had been all online.
Yeah.
That they didn't feel like they learned really very much or retained very much. And that might have been partly, you know, stress and newness and all of that. But I think part of it was just the sort of format of just being only in a computer screen with other people. And even if you know, I did like breakout rooms so they could talk in small groups, and we had projects that they worked on and came back and talked to the group about, and we had a Slack channel for back and forth. You know, I did all the things
the works
had recommended. Not all the things, obviously, but you know, a whole bunch of things. But I still feel like, you know, yeah, it's just some of teaching is relational work, right? Is about being in a kind of, you know, teacher-student relationship with your students, and that just doesn't feel as complete for most of us online. I think there are people, you know, I see sort of folks on Twitter or whatever saying, you know, like online is just as real, or you can't have real relationships. And I up to a point, and I think people do forge meaningful connections through primarily online interactions. But I think for the work of teaching, especially if it's just, you know, it's going to be 14, 15 weeks at most, I just feel like I can't. Like I struggled. I saw an email from a student from when I was teaching online, and I like struggled to even remember what she looked like or what she'd done in the class or whatever. Whereas, you know, a student from only a year and a half ago who was in a class with me in person, I would absolutely have a much better sense of. So I just think that's really, I think your fundamental argument is right, Joe. That it's just not as good. It can be better in a few small ways. It could be, you know.
Yeah. Also, like, so I'm in my department. I've kind of been a media guy. It's one of just my areas, and so I've been observing online really before COVID too. And really, I've seen good classes for online, but I have never observed an online class that I would send my own kid to. That goes right up to the MIT MOOCs. Like if you want to just pour millions of dollars into infrastructure or whatever, even those were like, you know, it's just not the same. And I think you're right about that, Daniel. It's like, it's the relationship aspect. It's like you become an extra adult in that students, or not adult because some of them are your age, but like a mentor in their sort of personal journey.
Yeah.
That's very, very, anyhow, well, thank you very much. Well, thank you for the endorsement of my view. If you have, for those of you who are watching online or after the fact, if you want to put your argument in as to why I'm completely out of lunch, you can do that in the chat window, or just take a clip and criticize it on social media. We see it all. Anyhow, let's turn to Daniel's book now. Hold on now, Daniel. I messed up the slide that I was trying to get, so I'm just going to put it in. I have the the picture here. Pardon my, this is Daniel's book. Hold on. Sorry. Having a rough technical morning. Producing Politics Inside the Exclusive Campaign World, where the privileged few shape politics for all of us. It was a book that got a ton of traction in the fall, and asked some really interesting questions about a space. Hold on. Oh, I'm just having a disastrous day with the controls here.
The book's right behind me. People can see it there.
What's that? Oh, good. All right, there we go. Thanks, Daniel. So compensating for my my poor production skills here. In any case, it got a ton of press, and it asked some really, really important questions about the hidden side of politics. Well, the aspect of politics that we don't see and we're probably not even aware of, but it can be very important. So can you start us off maybe by explaining to us, why do political campaigns matter? Like, what's the relevance of them?
Yeah. I mean, the sort of obvious answer, and it's part of why I care, absolutely, is that they may play some role in determining who actually gets elected, right? And who wields the power that you get when you're elected to, especially the focus of the book is really national politics. So, which party controls the Senate and the House, which party holds the presidency, and all the way down to all the state offices and local offices as well, there's huge impacts on our lives, right? Like from everything from, how many potholes there are on my streets in West Philadelphia, which is a lot, to the funding for the schools, to laws about inclusion for trans people, which obviously affect me directly. All of these things, right, come down to who holds office. So that's obvious, hopefully, to most people listening, but I think worth saying, right, that even, I have how do you say that word? Interlocutor. That's one of those words I've never said out loud.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I think it's interlocutor.
Yeah.
Right, thanks. There's a person in my head who's like, politics don't matter because it's all just the capitalists, whatever. And I think, I disagree with that, right? I think that there's lots of ways that differences between Democrats and Republicans in the US matter for people's quality of life in really important ways. But mostly that's obvious. One of the things I argue in the book actually is that it's not actually clear how much campaigns matter to who ends up winning. It's not clear to political science research. It's not clear to many of the people who are doing this work. And it's just incredibly hard to measure effectively. We can talk about that more if you want. But I think there's a less obvious way that campaigns matter that I think that is why I was really interested in this. And that's because they are, if not the way, at least one of the big ways that the world of politics, of political power, of state power seeks to be in communication with regular people, right? Offers a connection to, everybody else who's not in that world for their job or through their connections. The campaigns could, and to some extent do, function as a way to, let people know what's happening in politics, what are the key issues, and to tell people your voice matters, your vote matters, we want you involved in this. And so there's that sort of connective piece, and I think there's also sort of the cultural piece, for lack of a better word, which is campaigns are where huge amounts of communication come from, right? Ads, speeches, flyers, mailers, it's every ad you see in Novembers in Pennsylvania on any channel you might watch. And that's, I think, also not just where people either are invited in or not, but where they get their idea about what politics is about. And there's, and what politics is about. Is it about fighting? Is it about justice? What is it about? And that, I think, is also another reason to pay attention to campaigns.
And so I feel like this is my understanding, when we conventionally think of political campaigns, we might think of them as sports teams, and we might think that what really matters is which side won in the contest. Mm-hmm. And I gather from your work that you're saying, no, there's a there's like a hidden side where both sides are similar in some ways. Like the left and the right in the world of campaigning are a lot more similar than you might suspect. And the differences between those campaigns and like campaigners and the world of professional campaigning and society at large, that also has a political influence. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just said I think the policies, the way they govern, are different in important ways. But the people doing the work are pretty similar to each other. I kept looking through my interviews for, sort of expecting to see the Democrats are like this and the Republicans are like this. And there are some differences. Republicans have a better sort of channel for bringing new people in and helping them rise up through the ranks that's a little bit more organized and connected to college campuses. They tend to be, there's some differences in the ways the networks work and that sort of thing. But fundamentally, they all roughly see politics in similar ways, right? They all are deeply, deeply committed to their side. And they really are there not just because they like the competition or just because they're making a ton of money, although both of those things are often true, especially at the top of the sort of political staff, political consultant hierarchy. But they also are there because they believe that their party is better for the country. So that's one piece of it. But the other piece, which I think maybe you're getting at, is that they're also really demographically similar. So I have a chart I use in statistics I share in the book, and a chart I use in talks, showing that about 4% of people in the U.S. went to the top most exclusive colleges and universities in the country. 4% of people who went to college. So it's actually even smaller percentage of people overall. And something like 40% of Democratic campaign operatives went to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, also Swarthmore, not very many, but incredibly exclusive, elite, highly rejected colleges and universities. It's about 25% for Republican campaign operatives, so they're a little, from a somewhat broader swath of the U.S., but not that much broader.
Yeah. Do you think that it makes a big difference? Do you think that there is the fact that they draw from so heavily from elite circles? Do you think that creates like just a fundamental disconnect between the people who are running political campaigns and like the regular Joe on the street?
I think so. I mean, the short answer is yes. The slightly longer answer is, of course, I don't think it's impossible for somebody with a elite pedigree, or however you want to, that's sort of a terrible phrase, but who's come from these circles to be effective at connecting with people across that kind of class and social difference. But one of the things that I really emphasize in the book is that a lot of what the decisions that campaigns make, like they'll tell you, we have these sophisticated data analytics, and we have these models, and we use polling, and we use, you hear about Cambridge Analytica, and you hear about all these sort of like sophisticated micro data, whatever, big data, micro targeting, but and that's all true. They use that, but that can't tell you like whether Hillary Clinton should have gone with "I'm with her" as a campaign slogan, right? That can't tell you, even if it's all working perfectly, it can't tell you sort of the big themes that you should use, and it can't tell you sort of, it can't make every decision, right? And then it often doesn't work perfectly. In fact, it works really, really poorly. That was one of the issues in 2016. So a lot of what campaigns have to do is based on campaign professionals' sort of gut instinct about what's going to be effective. And that gut instinct, I think all gut instinct comes from sort of two places, right? It comes from your work experiences. It comes from, and in this case, most campaign professionals have been working in politics since they were 16 or 18 or 22. And it comes from your sort of social class location, your social milieu more broadly. And both of those things are, for campaign professionals, really, 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 really different than most of the rest of us, even sociologists, let alone, truck drivers or, waiters and waitresses or any other, regular person out there.
Dan, you want to ask a question? Or?
Yeah, I'm really curious, Daniel, about how these professionals then account for or assess their own failures, especially.
Yeah.
So you've got people who have been doing this for a long time, they go with their gut or they go with polling or whatever. What happens when that goes wrong? Like how do people stay in this game? Let's say they have a few failures in a row. Like what work do they do to kind of make that acceptable?
Yeah. I mean, there's two pieces to that, right? One is what story do they tell themselves? And the other is sort of what story do they tell the world to get in? I mean, in part, so for themselves, the thing that many of them said to me, and this was one of the things that was surprising to me, is basically like, we can make a difference around the margins. If the environment is such that it's going to be a Democratic year and I'm a Republican, there's only so much I can do. And so, one of the first people I interviewed actually was a Republican data, like micro-targeting data guy. And he basically said he'd just come from giving a talk where he had slides showing all the predictive models about how, and this was in 2010. So how sure it was that 2008 was going to be a Democratic year. And there's a issue of a political science journal published every other year with 10 or 12 articles with different models predicting the outcome of the election 3 or 6 or 9 months in advance, and more of them tend to be right than wrong. They're not all right all the time. So I think that's a big part of it for them, is they know that they're that a lot of what seems to matter for which party wins at the national level is which party was in power last and how's the economy. So that's a big part of it.
Can you sort of just give us, like, paint us a picture of what these campaigns look like from the inside? Like, when you get there, like, what do you see? Like, what's it like?
Yeah, so I mean, the book is based entirely on interviewing people, but I worked on the Obama campaign in 2008 at the very bottom of the "you are officially on staff" hierarchy. But I got a sense of it, and this is also what I heard from talking to people, which is I think the closest analog that many people might have experienced is like being in a play, in that sense of like you're all on a team, and as the production approaches, which is in this case the election day, everybody is working around the clock, and there's just not enough time. And you're all, I mean, the weekend before the 2008 election, I think I was out of my house the entire weekend. I think we slept like 2 hours a night. We lived on pizza, and I don't really drink whiskey, but there was a lot of whiskey, right? And it's just that, people said it's like being in a foxhole with somebody. It's like being at war. They talked a lot about war and sports, neither of which I have any direct experience with. But it's intense, and it's kind of addictive. I mean, I got back from that campaign, and my partner was like, "You are never doing that again." And in fact, I can't quite believe you did that just now. And
Wait, was it because you were gone or because you became intense?
I was gone, and even when I was home, I mean, I was the assistant regional field director for Northern California or something, right? So like,
okay, all right.
Obama is probably going to win. He's certainly going to win California. Like, how can they need you this much, right? That you need to be in the campaign office all day, every day. And then I would be like up at 2:00 in the morning, sending, a lot of what my work was like sending lists of voters for people to contact. And my partner was like, what, like how, but then, however many years later, 16, I can't do math right now, but arithmetic live is just something I'm really bad at.
We will hold you to it.
12 years later in 2020, she was helping run a national or a statewide political organization, and couldn't ever stop doing things. So she was at a higher level than I was, but that culture also of just like you must work all the time really got it's hard to avoid. And it's part of this is another thing I talk about in the book, is that it's part of also, since political professionals can't really make judgments about each other's skill based on purely objective criteria. One of the big sort of proxies that I think they use is, are you working 18 hours a day? And if you're working 18 hours a day and you always respond to an email right away or a text or whatever it is, then you're a good campaigner and you'll get moved up through the ranks and sort of get to be one of the higher ups. And if you prioritize balance or having a life or sleep, then you're not a good campaigner.
It's like performative commitment to the cause type of thing. Is that what that is?
I mean, I don't think they feel like it's performative. But I think there's got to be a way, when you're in it, you're sympathetic to it, like whether or not Obama won the presidency in 2008 was going to have huge knock-on effects, and we had to be really sure, and we couldn't be, the polls looked good, but polls looked good for Clinton 8 years later. So you want to put, leave everything on the field, is the sports expression, right? You just want to do everything you possibly can, and you can't know what that is. So I don't think it's, I'm very sympathetic to it. And I also think it's deeply unhealthy. It's not a sustainable way to live. It pushes out people who want to have lives, who want to have children, who need more than 3 or 4 hours of sleep at a night. So I think there's got to be a better way to do it, while I also have a lot of sympathy for why it is that way.
Do you think that the fact that those type of people thrive, do you think that ultimately affects policy and law?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, I think one of the sort of distinctions, I was expecting, differences between Republicans and Democrats. I was expecting differences, and there are some differences by sort of the part of campaigns that people work in. But one person, actually a couple people, said to me basically the real distinction in politics is between the campaign side and the policy side. The people who thrive in campaigns and the sort of policy wonks who are bad for campaigns, was what they said. So I'm not sure how much this culture is shaping the sort of policy offices of politicians, but it is shaping, many. I have this data set where I look at the careers of people who've ever worked in a presidential campaign, and a lot of them end up as the chief of staff or the communications director or et cetera for a senator or in the White House or et cetera. So they are shaping the choices that elected officials make. They're the intermediaries between elected officials as well as candidates and the public. So I think it does matter, even if there's also some other people in those offices who are coming at it from a different, maybe from a slightly different angle.
Dan, do you have to go?
I do, yeah. Sorry, y'all. I have to run and teach class, but Daniel, thanks so much for being on, and look forward to seeing our audience again soon.
All right, we'll see you next time, Dan. Take it easy. Thanks for stopping by. Let me ask you this, Daniel. Was there anything about that world that you found distasteful, or you thought was sort of dysfunctional, or had negative, aspects for society's larger well-being in the world of these political campaigns?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing was just the way that a lot of them talked about regular people and voters. I mean, they were, on the one hand, they said, people aren't that interested in politics, and that's true. Like, a lot of people are not paying that much attention. But they generally thought it was because people were like just sort of obsessed with trivial things, like they care more about their mall visits or their shoes or their crappy television than they do about politics. I don't think that's the main reason. They also, a couple people, I heard this sort of thing much more from Republicans, and not from all of them, but from a few of them, than I did from Democrats. But I definitely heard from some people who were like, if you don't care enough to vote, then your voice shouldn't matter. There's something really, this sort of, not just disdain, but at least from a couple of people I talked to, real sort of antipathy for people who were not paying attention to politics, and no sense that might be something that they could do anything about or had any role in. So that was certainly one part of it. I'll also, there are also, I mean, I went to some of the very fanciest offices and houses I've ever been to.
Yeah.
As part of this research, or at least that I'd ever been to up to that point. I've gone to some other. So, I'm not convinced that campaign finance is the solution to most of the problems, or certainly that I don't think it's either necessary or sufficient to solve many of the problems of American politics. I'm not opposed to it, but I don't think it's the main issue. But seeing how much money the very top people were channeling did sort of like,
Yeah. The money thing is very strange in American politics, because I was involved in Canadian politics before moving to the United States. And I was actually conservative in Canada, although I'm like a staunch Democrat here. I was like, whoa, this is a very different. Well, back when I was a conservative, I think the big issues were like they wanted to raise college tuition from like $1,500 a year to $2,000, and we wanted free trade with the United States. I think were those were sort of that was what a Canadian 1990s conservative was. But in my understanding is a totally different ball of wax up there now too. So, but in any case, yeah, I was surprised at how big money was. And I think part of it is just it's just a big country, and you need mass media money where you could do sort of retail politics in Canada, just because there were so many fewer voters per seat. Yeah. That was my impression. Yeah. That's interesting. So let me ask you this: like, so you've jumped into the world of political campaigns and witnessed like a whole dimension of politics that frankly I didn't really think much about. You think of the politicians, you think about the policies and the voters, but you don't think about who's scurrying in the middle there, interfacing with media and things like that and voters. Now that you've seen that world, what has shifted in the way you look at politics and the way you look at government? Like when you take just the sum total of all that you've seen, how are you thinking differently than you did before you dove into that world, even before you dove into the Obama campaign?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a sort of hard question to answer because it's been so long at this point.
Yeah.
This project started as my dissertation, and I was thinking about it even earlier in grad school, and then there was a long hiatus and process of various articles getting rejected and so on before there was this book. But I think one thing is, I think before I started this work, I would have had the much more, there's this book that came out that was probably part of why I wanted to do this work, that was by Marcos Moulitsas, who's who founded Daily Kos, which is this like online political site in sort of the early days of online political anything. And it's called, I think, Crashing the Gate. And their whole thing is like the Democrats are doing the wrong thing because their consultants are just in it to make money, and they're just sort of bad guys who are mercenaries. There's more to it than that, but that's the gist of the argument. And I think I probably expected something similar, that there was, that I wouldn't like the people that I met, that they were just cynical or whatever. And I was really, and surprised is maybe too strong, but I wasn't expecting people who cared as much about the issues as I think most people I talked with did. Somewhere in the book, I have a quote from a Republican pollster who basically, I asked if at the end of the interview, is there anything else you want me to know? And he was like, yes, tell people the difference between Republican and Democratic campaign professionals is not, is what we believe in. Like, I do this because, he said, not getting the quote exactly right, but he was like, it makes a whale of a difference who's president. I don't give a damn whether the toothpaste box is green or red, but and if I wanted to make more money, I would go into commercial marketing research instead of political polling. And I believe him. A couple people said that, but like, I don't care if the toothpaste is green, whatever is green or red. I care if it's Mitt Romney or John Kerry, or neither of those guys were running against each other. But you get the idea.
Yeah.
And that, it made me I really actually, liked a lot of the people that I talked with. I think partly they just have a lot of social skills. Although I said that to one person, and they were like, "We don't have social skills." I was like, "Well, I'm a sociologist. You guys have more social skills than we do." But I really like they're smart. They care. They want the policies that they care about to they so far as I could tell, unless they were all really good bullshitters, they think that this will be better for people, whichever side they're on. So that was sort of a surprise to me. Also, I was really prepared to think the Republicans were all awful people, and I think their policies, especially recently, are really awful. But the individuals, I think, believe in what they're doing.
Yeah, no, they believe they have unearnest agenda somewhere in there, like all of us, for their political support. You know what's interesting about that? I've experienced something very similar early in my career. I would have been very quick to reduce human action to the quest for money or power or status or things like that. And as I observe more of the world, I find that people just sort of have a commitment to a thing that's almost inexplicable. Mary Beth Stalp is somebody who's really, she's a sociologist of hobbies, I think at Northern Iowa. And it was like, like I find when I started studying podcasters, I figured they were in it for fame or money or attention or something. And I just met people who like deeply cared about knitting. They just super cared about anime. And you're like, wow, like people will just, like people really do care about things like a lot more than our theory assumes. And I'm catching that same, impression coming from you in politics. Yeah. Very, very, very interesting. All right. Tell me, okay, so hold on. Let's move on. Let's see. Tell me, what about methodologically? You've spoken to a lot of people. You got directly involved in sort of what you were studying. Like methodologically, do you think you grew as an observer? Were there any interesting lessons that you got in the field or through your interviews, tricks of the trade, things like that maybe matured in this foray into the world of politics?
I think if anything, one thing I learned from this project is that grad students should not try to do a 3-method dissertation, because I did I think by the time I was, not all of them while I was in grad school, but I did 84 interviews. I put together this data set in Excel with 5,000 individual people and their 20 rows for each person with their what they were doing in each of the election cycles from 1980 to 2020. And I did this sort of, it sort of started out intending to be participant observation or ethnography, and at the end I was just like, I can't take notes, I'm just doing this and I'll remember what I remember. So part of my lesson is just like, that was too much. Somebody, I don't think I would have let any of my advisors stop me, so I can't blame them, but somebody should have stopped me. So that's my one takeaway. And I think, I got really good at all the things necessary to put together a data set like the one I've got, and managing the undergrad research assistants who were helping me, and I've carried that through. The interviews, I don't know, I don't think I'm the world's best interviewer. I always listen to my interviews and I'm like, there's so many things I could have asked further, or I let that person get away with saying that without cross-referencing or etc. But
you're never going to get rid of that.
No.
That Monday morning quarterbacking, forget about it.
Yeah.
It's like criticizing your own paper. Like you're always going to come down hard on it when you read it.
Fair enough.
Just can't get you. So my understanding of your work is that you sort of work at the intersection of politics, stratification, and culture. You think that's a fair characterization of sort of where you're operating?
I think it does. I mean, we were talking before we started the official show, and the culture piece is a little funny because I'm really bad at culture, basically all aspects of culture that aren't parenting or academia or like queer culture from my 20s. And maybe a few other things. But I think what cultural sociology kind of means, at least as it applies to me, is taking meanings, taking sort of the sense that people make of things seriously as sometimes a cause, a mechanism, an important feature of the way the social world works. Or sometimes it just means reading a lot of Bourdieu and talking about that. So I think both of those, in that sense, I'm a cultural sociologist. I'm not a sociologist of culture.
Right. Well, you're a mega cultural mechanism guy in this one and in your previous book. I remember thinking, because that's what I liked about it. It spelled out a cultural mechanism. Of stratification. So I think you might be selling yourself short. I actually find you to be quite a good culture guy, in my opinion. But I guess self-definitions are always elusive. Let me ask you this: what work in your space excites you? Like, where do you who can you think of other people who are doing stuff or other areas of research in your space that you think are exciting and you'd like to sort of direct people's attention towards?
Yeah, this is a question I should have made a list for before we started.
You're gonna get in trouble.
Forget the names, but I think so I'm gonna maybe do this without saying any names. But there's a set of work that I think is really good, which is doing this thing of looking at the people who are the sort of intermediaries between regular people in power in various ways. And there's work on wealth managers, or people who run family offices. There's work on people in in administrative roles or bureaucratic roles of the state, but all of the people who are not the elites themselves, but who are the managers, the facilitators, the supporters, and the intermediaries for elites, I think is really important and worth doing. I think, understanding elites is also important, but that, you can't often get Bill Gates himself to talk to you, or even people whose names you don't know but are equally unbelievably wealthy. But you can get the people who run their offices, who manage their foundations, who, et cetera, to talk to you. I don't think Barack Obama is ever going to sit down and talk with me, although, if he wanted to, that'd be great. But I've talked to a lot of the people who, I haven't talked to his two head campaign managers, but I've talked to a lot of the people who helped get him into office, or similarly Hillary Clinton and so on. So I think that the sort of the attention to the worlds in which eliteness is produced and supported, or power is produced and supported, is really important work. And I think there's a lot more to be done there.
Yeah, I find it actually more I'm less interested in what the figureheads have to say about, the figureheads of social movements, because I often feel like they're, it's idiosyncratic, and they might not be able to tap into whatever social processes are working under them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say it'd be awesome to talk to celebrities though, but I see the value of what the space that you're operating in. Let me rephrase my question.
Mm-hmm.
So a young sociologist, an early career sociologist who is wants to do a type of sociology that's going to be relevant in the world of politics. They want to engage these campaigns. They want to engage political space. What should they do? How should they proceed? Before you answer, I just want to say we are watching the chat window. So if you have questions while Daniel's giving the answer, please put them in the chat window and we'll pass them along. So go ahead, Daniel. What's your view?
My first answer is probably a really cynical one, which is, this book did get some traction, and there are some organizations and some people who sort of took it up and are trying to make the world of campaigns and the world of politics more inclusive. But the hopes that I had for how much change you might see, but, no book ever does everything you want it to. So fine. I knew they were sort of dreams in a way, but the hopes that I had for what might happen and actual visible engagement with the world of campaigns so far, there's a pretty big gap between those two things. So I'm not sure. I actually think if you're a young person interested in making a difference in the world of politics, you should go into the world of politics and not study the world of politics. That said, and I think if you are going to study the world of politics, the kind of stuff that gets more traction is probably the stuff that's more like what they're doing already, which is, experiments on, there's these two political scientists that both actually went to Berkeley around the time I did, Kalla and Brockman, Josh Kalla and David Brockman, or possibly I've got the first and last names mixed up. But they, they do all these experiments showing that how effective deep canvassing is at changing people's mind or that sort of thing. And that's the kind of stuff that a campaign can take and go, oh, we should be doing more of this. Let's go do this. So I think if that's, if you have an idea about what might be more effective, I think that kind of thing could work. I think if you're, I think the reason to be a sociologist is mostly because you want to study the stuff and understand it and think about it and talk about it. And if you're lucky, that has some effect in the real world outside of sociology. But it's an indirect route to that kind of influence.
Yeah. The prize is the research, the act of talking to people itself, I think. It's funny how you mentioned it's really true when you are about to write something or publish something that you really put a lot in. You imagine it a lot like, you remember in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, how they like wrote a song that aligned the planets and brought world peace or something like that. You want to believe it's that, but like the best case scenario, my experience is like, a couple press pickups and about a birthday worth of Facebook likes. and then a positive job review or something like that seems to be like, what do you really get? Yeah. Anyhow, well, all right. Well, thank you. First of all, before I let you go, Daniel, so you're going to the ASA, do you want to tell us about the session? Do you know when it is, or just tell us what to look for on the program?
Yeah, so there's an author meets critic session for my book. So I think if you look for Producing Politics, you'll see it. There's also, I'm on a session where I'm talking about my current work, which is sort of this book is Producing Politics. My current work is talking to people who receive politics or consume politics. So talking to poor and working class people across Pennsylvania. So I'm also on a panel with that. And really, the easiest thing is just to look for my last name because I can't remember what that panel's called. But yeah, and if anybody, I make this offer periodically on Twitter, but in case this catches other people, like I'm in a small department. I don't have grad students. If there's anybody watching who wants to have a coffee at ESS or ASA in the summer, just find me and let me know. I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, first of all, that's awesome. So if you see Daniel around, I try to explain to people like, I find most people are very happy to talk about their work because the joke is, and I'll apologize to anybody who's already heard me make it on the podcast, is like your colleagues have already heard it 10 times. Your spouse isn't at all interested, and the students are only feigning interest. So it's nice when you meet someone who actually is interested in what you're doing. So reach out. Daniel Laurison from Swarthmore University. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun as always.
All right. You've been listening to the Annex Sociology Podcast. Catch us on the web at theannexpodcast.com. The Annex is a production of the Queen's Podcast Lab. For more information, visit queenspodcastlab.org. On behalf of my guest, Daniel Laurison, I'm Joe Cohen. Thanks for listening.